Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast for intermediate to advanced level English learners. What does it mean to be a patriot? What does it mean to love your country? Should you support your nation unconditionally, no matter what, and in any situation? Let's talk about these questions on today's episode of Thinking in English. The full transcript for this episode is available on the Thinking in English blog, and why not head over to my Instagram page, Thinking in English Podcast, for more excellent English content. Here is today's vocabulary list. As always, the written list is available in the description of the podcast and also on my blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. Unconditionally. Unconditionally. In a way that is complete and not limited in any way. For example, he thanked his mother for being unconditionally supportive. Imaginary. Imaginary. Something that is imaginary is created by and exists only in the mind. For example, as a child, my brother had an imaginary friend. Connotation. Connotation. A connotation is a feeling or idea that is suggested by a particular word, although it need not be part of that word's actual meaning. Or it's something suggested by an object or a situation. For instance, the word resolute means stubborn, but with a more positive connotation. To diverge. To diverge. To follow a different direction, or to be or become different. As in, although the two organizations used to work closely together, their objectives have diverged recently. Exclusionary. Exclusionary. Causing someone or something not to be allowed to take part in an activity or to enter a place. As in, the political party has been criticized for its exclusionary membership rules. Superiority. Superiority. The fact that one person or thing is better, stronger than another. For example, the French football team demonstrated their superiority over the Spanish last night. Flaw. Flaw. A fault, mistake, or weakness. For example, this report is full of flaws. Meaningful. Meaningful. Useful, serious, or important. As in, it is difficult to form meaningful relationships with colleagues when you work online. Most of you probably don't care about the game of chess, and neither do I really. But recently, there has been a great deal of controversy within the International Chess Federation. Russian Grandmaster Sergei Karjakin has been banned for 6 months from the international competitions after publicly supporting Vladimir Putin and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, whether banning him is right or wrong, or the ethics of Russia's actions in Ukraine, they're not the topics of this episode. Instead, something Karjakin tweeted earlier this month made me think about a philosophical question. On March 11th, Karjakin tweeted, "No matter what happens, I will support my country in any situation without thinking for a second. I will support my country in any situation." In other words, his support and his love for his country is unconditional. He will always support Russia. Why? I'm not interested in Kajakin's specific love and support for Russia, but in the wider philosophical question of supporting your country. What does it mean to be a patriot? What does it mean to love your country? And should you support your country unconditionally, or in Kajakin's words, in any situation without thinking for a second? Let's talk about these questions in today's episode. I think before we get into discussing nationalism and patriotism, it is worth taking a second to think about what a country is. I actually recorded an episode about how to make your own country a few months ago, but today I want to think a little more philosophically about the topic. So, I'm going to make a slightly controversial and confusing statement now. Your country is imaginary. Your nation is imaginary. Your nation doesn't exist. I use the word nation here instead of country, as a country is a political organization. However, countries are also something imagined by people. If you took away all of the humans from our planet, there would be no countries. There would be islands, forests, mountains, rivers, trees, and plants. But no Indonesia, no China, no Sudan, no Barbados. Benedict Anderson, one of the most respected political scientists of the 20th century, came up with the term imagined communities in the 1980s to help him study nationalism. Our nations, the nations that we love and support, are imagined communities. Why imagined? Well, they are imagined because you are never going to know, meet, or even hear about the vast majority of other members of the community or other people from your country. You have no relationships, no connections, other than being born in the same political community. And that's why it is an imagined community, because it's not like your small village, which is the traditional community where you know everyone, or at least you know of everyone. In a country like China with over 1 billion people, I think you might meet 1,000 people in your life if you live in a village, not a billion. However, just because the nation is imagined doesn't mean it is not important or influential. Even someone like myself, who is constantly critical and annoyed at my country, supports the English football team during international tournaments and cheers for UK athletes at the Olympic Games. We see members of our nation as the same as us, as connected to us, even if those connections are not necessarily real. And in many ways, they're not real, right? I have no connection to any of the English football players. While football tournaments and the Olympic Games are relatively harmless ways to support your country, our love for our imagined communities can also be devastating. Regardless of the conditions within our countries, the inequality, the poverty, or the corruption, people still tend to feel a need to support their nation. And over the past 100 or so years, millions of people have been willing to die to defend their nation and defend their country against other nations and countries. Willing to die for people they will have never met, and willing to die for a country that probably treated them poorly and unfairly. So, you've heard me use a few words connected to the debate over loving your country already in this episode, specifically patriotism and nationalism. But what are these, and what do they mean? And perhaps more importantly, what is the difference? Now, both patriotism and nationalism are words that involve some form of pride and love for your country, but they have very different connotations. According to dictionary.com, the noun patriotism means devoted love, support, and defense of one's country, or a type of national loyalty. When we think of the word patriotism and when we think of patriots, we often think about the people who defend our countries in the military, as well as others who serve the country through working in hospitals or in the police force or in the fire service. Individual acts of patriotism include volunteering your time to help your country, displaying your pride by owning a national flag, or supporting your country's sports teams. In the 19th century, patriotism and nationalism had very similar meanings and usages. However, since then, they have grown apart. Actually, it is probably more accurate to say that while patriotism still has the same meaning, nationalism has diverged. Like patriotism, nationalism means to have a love or devotion to one's country or nation. It is used to talk about strong support and love for your homeland. However, there is a key distinction between the two terms. Nationalism is exclusionary, while patriotism means you have pride in your country. It doesn't mean that you think or believe your country is superior or your country is better when compared to other nations. However, this is a component of nationalism. The belief that your country's culture and interests and politics or whatever it is more important than other places or other nations. In other words, nationalism is a form of aggressive or excessive patriotism. Fascist regimes in the 1930s and 1940s mixed ideas of nationalism with ideas of ethnic and cultural superiority. And in modern usage, nationalism tends to be used to describe the political movements of Brexit, Donald Trump, and other leaders around the world, from the Philippines to Austria to Brazil. When you use these words, it is important you understand the context. Patriotism tends to be relatively positive. It refers to the positive action of loving, supporting, and having pride in your country, working to improve your country and help your country. That is patriotism. On the other hand, nationalism tends to be a relatively negative term. We use it for political movements and ideologies that dislike foreigners, immigrants, or even ethnic minorities within a country. Rather than simply having pride in your country, nationalism suggests that you believe your country should be considered better and superior to others. If you are a patriot and you have pride in your country, does this mean you should always support your country unconditionally in any situation? I asked this question to a few friends from Germany and Taiwan while we were at a restaurant last week, and we all agreed that we don't support our countries unconditionally. Some of my past episodes on Thinking in English, especially the insulting Boris Johnson one, probably show you that I am not afraid to be critical of the UK. In fact, as a student, I organised protests against the UK's refugee policies, and I have been constantly critical of Britain's historical actions around the world. However, a lot of people seem to think that being critical of the actions of your country means that you are not patriotic. I don't particularly like singing the British national anthem because I don't really like the Queen. Well, I like the Queen, but I don't really like the monarchy. And I also find the idea of displaying a country's flag everywhere a little bit strange. But this doesn't mean that I hate the UK. I was too young to oppose Britain's involvement in the Iraq War, but I was definitely against UK military action in Libya and Syria. And moreover, I ran an Amnesty International group in the UK that did a campaign against Britain every week. We often campaigned against British weapons being used by dictatorships in the Middle East and Africa. But none of this means that I hate my country. To me, loving your country and being patriotic means seeing the flaws and mistakes in your country. Nationalists have a saying, my country, right or wrong. The suggestion being that you should support your country, whether they are right or wrong, regardless of the situation. However, I like this quote instead from Lee Child's Jack Reacher books. My country, right or wrong, which means nothing unless you admit your country is wrong sometimes. Loving a country that was right all the time would be common sense, not patriotism. You can still support your country, even if you admit the flaws and negatives. For example, I believe the UK's history of colonialism is terrible. Does this mean I hate the UK? No, it doesn't. But I understand the negatives, and I believe that more should be done in the UK to support the victims of colonialism and educate the British public about the realities of the empire. I think we should learn from the mistakes, recognize what is wrong, and try to improve the country. And that's what I think loving your country means. Should you support your country unconditionally, no matter what, and in any situation? I don't think so. Countries do stupid, violent, and insane things all the time. Especially in our modern political systems, the oligarchies, the representative democracies, and dictatorships. In these systems, normal people like me and like you don't have any meaningful voice in the decisions that our country makes. Why should we be expected to always support the decisions made by the powerful elite people in charge? So here is today's final thought. In this episode of Thinking in English, I have tried to make you think about your loyalty, pride, and the support of your country. I also tried to introduce the concepts of imagined communities, nationalism, and patriotism. It is perfectly fine to love and support your nation. But should this support be unconditional? Should you love and support your country's actions no matter what, in all situations? Personally, I believe you should support your country, but not unconditionally. And that a true patriot wants to improve their country, which can only happen when you admit your country has done wrong or has flaws. However, I'm also aware that some of you listening will definitely disagree with me. And if you do disagree with me, let me know why. Make it a kind message, but I'm really interested to know why you think differently to me, why you would support your country unconditionally. You can reach out through the comments on the blog, or you can leave a comment on Spotify, or send me a message on Instagram, I guess. And what do you think? Should we support our countries unconditionally? Thank you for listening to today's episode. I really appreciate every single person who takes the time to listen to my podcast. Make sure you head over to the blog, thinkinginenglish.blog, so you can read the whole transcript of today's episode and look at some of the other content I upload onto the blog. You can also check out my Instagram page. I post very regularly, and if you want to message me, I always reply to people on Instagram. Please leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. Leave a rating on Spotify. You can do that now, and I'm trying to get to 150 ratings by the end of February. Please recommend to all of your friends and maybe share on social media. And why not go back and listen to a few of the old episodes? It's one of the best ways to support the podcast. You can also donate on the Thinking in English blog by going to the support page. And yeah, have a great day, and I'll see you next time.